Hey everyone, in this video we're going to explore one of the more fascinating pieces of military equipment the Roman legionary would carry, and it's called the pilum. You might have heard of this or seen this in depictions of Roman soldiers, but the pilum is the javelin that they're always carrying, as you can see pictured here. Now the origins of the pilum are a pretty debated topic, and one that I won't cover here because there's not really a set answer as to where it came from. But what we do know is that legionary soldiers of the late Republic and early Empire were carrying this weapon as part of their standard battle gear. So the pilum measures around 6 feet long, and it was a specialized type of javelin that had a wooden shaft and a pyramid head. And at the very end of it, it had a metal tip that's usually about 2 feet long. So you can see it pictured here. Now, the design is really interesting because it's all specially designed for its purpose, which was to pierce armor. So sources indicate that the Roman legionary would carry one, if not two, pila into battle. So one is called a pilum, and two are called pila, right? Now you can see in this image here a Roman soldier carrying the pila javelin. So what we know is that when an enemy army would charge the Roman legionaries, we're told that they would throw, meaning the Roman legionaries would throw their pila directly into the charging enemy ranks. This would disrupt their charge. The design of the pilum allowed it to penetrate enemy shields and armor. And given that these were thrown into charging enemies, the pilum uses the enemy's momentum against it, driving the metal tip through the shield. The length of that metal tip would allow the pilum to impale an enemy soldier, even if they were standing or hiding behind the shield. Now, if the enemy were to block the pilum, it appears to have been designed to bend, right? So that metal tip is made of iron, which is not going to be the strongest or sort of hardest metal you can imagine. It can bend under certain circumstances. So if the pilum bent in an enemy's shield, as you can sort of see here, it would be rendered useless, meaning the shield would be useless, because it would be difficult to pull the pilum out due to the bend and the weight of the wooden shaft. With the pilum weighing down the shield, an enemy would now be forced to discard their shield, right? You can't carry a shield that has a pilum stuck in it. It also wouldn't be very easy to pull out. You can tell by the shape of the tip of this metal part of the pilum that the rod is thinner than the actual head of the pilum. That means if you tried to pull it, it would basically get stuck. It would not be an easy thing to pull out. So at this point, the second pilum becomes really devastating, as it would be thrown into the enemies who may no longer be carrying shields. So if you had an enemy soldier who just dodged the first attack of the pila being thrown, right, the first pilum, even if he was able to block that, he has to throw his shield down, and now he's not protected from the next pilum that could be thrown. So even if it weren't deadly, the pilum would disrupt the enemy's shield wall, and it would punch gaps in their line. This would allow the legionaries to charge with their gladius, which is their short sword that was designed for thrusting in close combat. Now, the gladius is especially useful after a pilum because if you're able to disrupt the shield wall and get a bunch of your enemies to not carry a shield anymore, now that gladius becomes particularly devastating because you could push or hit the enemy with your shield. The Romans have that tower shield that you always see, in images like this. If you could hit your enemy in the face with that or block their arm up, now they're totally exposed and the gladius becomes a very devastating weapon. Now, we have an account of the pilum from the ancient Greek historian Polybius, and he gives us an account of how deadly they could be in battle. Now, here he might be talking about other javelins. There are different types of javelins that the Romans would use, but you get the idea of how effective any sort of javelin could be. So if you read it, we have a translation here, and this comes from Evelyn Schuckberg in the 1880s, right? So I just want to credit her. It's not my translation, but this is book 2, right? Chapter 30 of Polybius's Histories. So Polybius states, when the men who were armed with the pilum advanced in front of the legions, in accordance the infantry engage with the regular method of Roman warfare. and hurled their pila in rapid and effective volleys. The inner ranks of the Celts found their jerkins and leather breeches of great service, but to the naked men in the front ranks, this unexpected mode of attack caused great distress and discomfiture. For the Gallic shields, not being big enough to cover the man, the larger the naked body, the more certainty was there of the pilum hitting. And at last, not being able to retaliate because the pilum throwers were out of reach and their weapons kept pouring in, some of them, in the extremity of their distress and helplessness, threw themselves with desperate courage and reckless violence upon the enemy, and thus met a voluntary death, while others gave ground step by step toward their own friends, whom they threw into confusion by this manifest acknowledgement of their panic. Thus, the courage of the Geissatai, had broken down before the preliminary attack of the Pilum. So here we get a really good insight into just how devastating this could be. So Polybius is describing this endless volley of the Pila, right? He calls it rapid and effective. And it's talking about how you might have some protection if you had sort of leather breeches, right? As the translation says here, meaning leather clothing. That might help, and a shield would help. But if you are unprotected, Polybius mentions the naked man, but that could also account for someone without a shield. You are going to have a very tough time fighting off, the attack of Roman legionaries throwing the pila. Okay, and as you can see here, as Polybius says, they meet their death. Right, they have nothing else to do but throw themselves with desperate courage. Right, he says, into the Roman ranks. You're not going to make it. Okay, so this is a really good sort of firsthand account of just how devastating an attack with the pilum could be, and it explains a little bit as to why the Roman army liked this weapon and why Roman legionaries were carrying it. It all gives you some insight into their battle tactics. So as you can see, the pilum was a really deadly weapon in the hands of a Roman legionary, and through modern research and archaeology, we can see just how useful and devastating it would have been in combat, right? We have a lot of good reconstructions and data that help us understand how the pilum was used and how effective it could be. And on that note, if you want to keep learning about the pilum, there's a lot of great videos you can see on YouTube. One that I always like to show my students is this demonstration from the Smithsonian channel, which shows you how effective a pilum could be at piercing through a shield, but there's a bunch of others that'll give you really good details into how it was used and how it kind of fit into the equipment of a standard Roman legionary. So I'd highly encourage you to do some research on your own and explore it, and this will help you understand a little bit if you dive into Latin where they mention the pilum, right? It'll help you understand how the Roman army fought.